Is your diet quietly accelerating the aging process? Welcome to the Aging Well podcast, where we explore the science, stories, and strategies behind living a longer, healthier, and more purposeful life. I am your host, Dr. Jeff Armstrong, an exercise physiologist with a passion for making science simple and life better as we age, with my co-host, Corbin Bruton. Today's episode started with a simple question Corbin asked ChatGPT. What are the top 5 foods that make you age faster? The answer sparked a thoughtful discussion, not just about sugar, seed oils, and ultra-processed snacks, but about how we think about food, aging, and health in a world full of misinformation. This episode provides practical, sustainable ways to eat healthy without falling into fear or restriction to help you age well. The Aging Well podcast encourages informed decision-making and always consult your physician and scientific literature when making decisions about your health.
So I asked ChatGPT for a list of the top 5 foods that make you age faster, and I'd love to share its response and our thoughts with our viewers and listeners.
Sounds like a great idea. And I'm sure just about every fitness influencer on YouTube has addressed this, but why not address it on the Aging Well podcast? What was ChatGPT's response?
Yeah, it's interesting. The first thing it said was, honestly, I'm cautious with these kinds of questions because they often fuel anxiety or lead people to fear food rather than understand it. That said, there are certain foods, really patterns of eating, that over time tend to accelerate biological aging by promoting inflammation, oxidative stress, and metabolic dysfunction.
Well, that was thoughtful of ChatGPT. So let's talk about this. What do you think about their initial statement there about fueling anxiety and leading people to fear food rather than understand it?
I think it's really interesting that a artificial intelligence is cognitively aware of societal norms and it recognizes what can and cannot trigger an individual. So its algorithm is becoming so advanced that it's becoming socially aware of hot topics that could be offensive to a certain individual and add stress. So I think that's really interesting, which in the past, before, artificial intelligence couldn't really recognize that. But I think we're coming a long way.
I don't think it's cognitively recognizing that. I think it's just being trained that repeatedly on the internet, people are, making statements about fueling anxiety and leading people to fear food. And so it just picks up on that. So what are the 5 foods?
Well, in a broad sense, ChatGPT responded with 1, sugary beverages, 2, ultra-processed snacks and packaged baked goods, 3, refined carbs, 4, processed meats, and 5, industrial seed oils.
So that's sufficiently vague. What more did ChatGPT have to say?
Yeah, it really didn't give many specifics.
Well, I would agree that it is probably irresponsible to list 5 specific foods. And as we mentioned, the influencers on YouTube, that's what most will end up doing. It's like 5 very specific foods that are going to make you age faster.
Why is that?
Well, there's a complexity to nutrition and the interaction among foods that you really can't pinpoint specific foods and try and eliminate those from the diet. The idea is to really look at kind of the more broad categories that are interacting together to cause people to age. And again, everybody ages a little bit differently. We have different genetics, so we're going to respond differently to different foods. But there are pretty much general categories that can have an impact on one's aging and the rate at which we age. So let's take the broad categories one at a time. What did it say about sugary beverages? I think we'd agree that that's probably something that we should not be consuming.
Yeah, totally. Sugary beverages like soda, energy drinks, or those syrup-laden coffee concoctions, these spike blood sugar and insulin repeatedly, promote inflammation, and increase glycation, essentially damaging proteins in your skin, blood vessels, and brain.
Yeah, so that's not unusual. I think they're spot on with that. When you look at sugary drinks, there's just no nutritional value whatsoever to those drinks, particularly as we look at the syrup-laden coffee concoctions that people are drinking. Pretty much anything that's going to be coming in a can is not going to be the healthiest thing for us. And the idea of glycation is it's attaching a glucose to protein molecules. And so that can really be damaging to, like I said, our skin, our blood vessels, and our brain. And so these are not healthy things to be drinking. I think, again, just from the dietary standpoint, if we want to reduce our body composition, just simply cutting out one sugary beverage a day is going to have a tremendous effect on body composition, which in turn is going to impact our life expectancy, our longevity. But also that the effects that the sugar is having on our insulin levels, the fact that inflammation is going to lead to greater arterial damage and just digestive issues and all other kind of issues, I think they're pretty spot on with the general categorization of, limiting sugary beverages if we want to age well. So what else did ChatGPT say we drink instead?
Well, what it advised was instead drink water, herbal teas, or coffee with no or minimal sweetener. If you need a flavor boost, use citrus, mint, or a splash of unsweetened almond milk. I don't know about
Okay,
almond
what are your
milk.
thoughts on that?
I don't know about almond
What's
milk.
that?
I feel like there's a lot of literature out there
You,
that kind of shows that almond milk is not necessarily as good for us as we once thought
I'm
it
going to
was.
start having you cite this literature that you're talking about because, as far as I know, there's no real literature that says almond milk is bad for you. There's probably a greater amount of literature out there that would infer that dairy products are more damaging for us. When you look at kind of a more plant-based approach to eating, a splash of almond milk, even if almond milk is not healthy, is going to probably be better for you than a splash of certainly cream or non-dairy creamers. Anything that is coming in those little plastic containers would generally not be the healthiest thing for us. But unsweetened almond milk is essentially almond and water. There's nothing unhealthy about it. It's maybe not the most protecting or most effective for protecting the environment because it does take a lot of almonds in order to make that almond milk. And so, you could make some arguments against it environmentally, but from a health standpoint, I don't see any negatives to drinking almond milk. So you're going to have to bring up this literature with citations.
Okay. As far as everything else goes, citrus and mint, I add lime to my water. I'll use mint. Sometimes I'll use a mint lime cucumber combo. I think it's really refreshing, especially on these hot summer days that we've had. But yeah, other than that, I like those suggestions. I obviously use lemon in my tea. So, but yeah, the almond milk was that was only my concern.
Just don't add lemon and milk to your tea.
Yeah.
I remember once as a kid, we went out to eat, and my older sister, I forget how old she was. She couldn't have been that old, but she got tea at dinner, and she put cream and lemon in the coffee or the tea, and it just like the milk curdled. And it was the funniest thing. I still remember that after all these years. But herbal teas are great. I like chamomile tea in the evening to help kind of work me towards sleep. A lot of your herbal teas have very positive benefits towards aging. I like hibiscus tea. Just tends to have a pretty decent flavor. You don't really have to add much to it. I am a coffee drinker, and I think there's been a reasonable amount of evidence that coffee has positive health benefits, particularly for aging. And where it becomes unhealthy is where we start adding the cream to it and adding all of the crap that goes into your lattes and things like that. I honestly think black coffee is the way to go. Really no sweetener. You really shouldn't have to sweeten coffee. I do add in my morning coffee turmeric, and it's a little bit messier. You got to be careful not to get the turmeric stains all over your clothes or everything that you touch. So you just got to be a little bit more careful. But just a little bit less than a teaspoon of turmeric stirred in there with some black pepper to help with the absorbability. It's really great for being anti-inflammatory. I used to add coconut oil. I've moved away from that in an effort to lower my cholesterol levels. And just for the fact, is it really necessary? If it's potentially raising my cholesterol, do I need the extra 100 or so calories in my coffee? So I've just avoided it, and the turmeric is working pretty well. How do you drink your coffee?
I either go black or I add a splash of regular milk or A2 milk. And if I want to get more of that sweet taste to it, I'll add just like a few drops of just raw maple syrup. That's what I do. And I think it's really good. So
Yeah,
I
I'll
also
stick with my
do
black
a
coffee.
when I'm at work though, and I do a full scoop of vanilla whey protein in my coffee, and it satiates my hunger, so I can go a few hours without like craving anything. That caffeine protein combo. So that's another thing I do.
If you're enjoying the Aging Well podcast, be sure to like, subscribe, or follow on your favorite platform so you will never miss an episode. And if you find our conversations helpful, please share the podcast with a friend, because aging is something we're all doing, and we're better at doing it together. And support our guests in this podcast financially by visiting the affiliate links in the episode description below, and use the links or codes provided for discounts on products we have vetted and feel comfortable recommending to our valued viewers and listeners. Thank you, and now back to the podcast. I think we're going to talk a little bit more, and particularly in an upcoming episode, we'll talk a little bit more about protein restriction when it comes to longevity and aging well. But let's kind of move on. What's it talk about with the next category, the ultra-processed snacks?
Ultra-processed snacks and packaged baked goods. Think donuts, chips, crackers, or boxed dessert. Now, they're often full of refined carbs, industrial oils, and artificial ingredients that disrupt gut health and drive low-grade chronic inflammation.
So nothing unusual there. I think most everybody will tell you, just cut the ultra-processed snacks. And I like it. It's ultra-processed snacks, not just ultra-processed foods, because we've addressed that on this podcast before. There are ultra-processed foods that can be considered healthy, although really for longevity, your best approach is going to be whole foods at the very base level. Because the more we start refining things, the more opportunity is for chemicals to leach into the foods, and for that refinement to lead to things that are going to disrupt our basic metabolism. So yeah, refined carbs, we want to avoid those. Industrial oils, I like the way they frame that. I mean, it is industrial, but it sounds almost like you're drinking motor oil when it talks about industrial oils and all those artificial ingredients. I think when we're looking at any of our snack foods, we want to be snacking on whole foods. We want to be snacking on things that, if they do come in a package, we can identify the ingredients that are included in that snack. And if there's things that you cannot understand without having a degree in chemistry, you probably should not be eating that snack. What are your thoughts on its initial statement about refined carbs, industrial oils, artificial ingredients, and so on, and gut health?
I mean, we've talked a lot about refined carbs on this podcast, and as far as things that are creating inflammation and disrupting the gut, I would have the listeners go back and listen to the episode with Dr. Farrell. He talks a lot about how the foods we eat definitely have a huge impact on our body that we don't even recognize, but it puts our body into almost like a weird fight or flight stage. So I ever since we interviewed him, though, I've never been able to look at pizza the same way again, which is kind of a bummer, but it's good because pizza definitely does not help you age well, but man, it is tasty.
Well, I think one of the big concepts that are really emerging in our, I hate to say longevity science, because I feel like to a certain extent, much of the longevity science has just become overly hyped and increasingly BS. But, from a standpoint of health span and reducing the risk of disease, which in turn is going to increase our longevity, I think gut health has become increasingly important there. There's an increasing link between gut health and our overall health. And then as we look at inflammation as well, and you talk a lot about inflammaging, so many of us are, because of the foods we eat, living in a constant state of low-grade chronic inflammation. And so we want to tip the scales to where our foods are going to be much more anti-inflammatory as opposed to pro-inflammatory. And when we're eating foods that are processed and have a lot of chemicals in them, they tend to be much more pro-inflammatory. And that's going to drive that low-grade inflammation. It can lead to heart disease, lead to insulin sensitivity, or rather insulin resistance, not sensitivity. And, so many of the kind of low-grade autoimmune diseases that we might be experiencing. So what did ChatGPT suggest that we eat instead?
Well, instead, it said reach for nuts, seeds, a piece of dark chocolate, or Greek yogurt with berries. Whole food snacks not only satisfy, but also support cellular repair.
Yeah, again, we're focused on those foods that are going to be more anti-inflammatory. And if you look at berries, dark chocolate, many of the seeds and nuts, they all have some varying levels of anti-inflammatory effects on the body. And none are individually probably greater than others. Although, you look at blueberries, strawberries, those are probably two of your most anti-inflammatory fruits that you can eat. Dark chocolate, as long as it is truly dark chocolate, is low in sugar and really limiting the dairy included in it, is going to have some pretty good anti-inflammatory effects as well. And many of your nuts, I think one of the best nuts right now or seeds is probably pumpkin seeds. I read something recently that they may be even considered to be more healthy and more anti-aging than flaxseed.
Is that because of the zinc
But including
content?
a lot more flaxseed. No, it's not really the zinc content per se. It's it's the number of different minerals that are in there. I mean, pumpkin seeds are very high in magnesium, but we're really looking at some of the omega-3s and things that we get from those and the impacts that they have on the gut health. Personally, I've started to include a lot more flaxseed in my food. We talked about coffee. One thing that I didn't include that we put in our coffee in the morning is we brew our coffee with just like probably a tablespoon or more of flaxseed, and just to get those extra omega-3 oils. I don't know. I mean, I have no documentation on the overall effect of that. But I look at it as one of those, chalk it up in the column of can't hurt, can only help. And if, at worst, it's going to be neutral in terms of my steps toward anti-aging. So flaxseed is really good, including that in your snacks. Even putting like something that I think ChatGPT didn't include is wheat germ. Sprinkle some wheat germ on that Greek yogurt along with the berries, or include that in your morning oatmeal. My oatmeal in the morning now includes, I'm really like beefing it up. I have, in addition to using more of the steel cut oats, is favored over rolled oats, but I put hemp seed, flaxseed, chia seed, and wheat germ all in there. So it gives me a pretty healthy breakfast. And to be honest with you, I am forcing myself to eat later in the day because it's like I'm not hungry well into the afternoon after eating that. So that to me is a much, much better snack than reaching for something that comes in a little plastic package. What are your thoughts?
I was just thinking of that breakfast that you just mentioned, and I was gonna say I seed what you did there
Oh my
because
God.
you put a lot of you put a lot of those seeds in there. I don't know. I'm more of a fan of protein in the morning. I think getting eggs in, 4 eggs for females, roughly about 6 eggs for males. I think that protein content, that omega content that we were just talking about. And I think if we use that for breakfast, which I know is not convenient for everyone, but if you have the ability to do so, I think just me personally, I think getting the protein in first thing in the morning, and then that'll keep you full throughout the day. I feel like if you have too many grains, it's gonna spike the insulin level, and then you'll get that crash, and then you'll get hungry. But that's just I'm also speaking from personal experience on what works for me, and I feel like what works for me is more protein first thing in the morning, and then I'm not as hungry
Okay.
throughout the day.
Well, I kind of led you into a tangent there because we're talking about snack foods, not breakfast. But you brought up protein, and I think there is pretty good breadth of evidence in longevity research that indicates that protein restriction is going to have a greater benefit in terms of longevity. I mean, that's, I think, a whole nother topic for this podcast. And when we start looking at what does that mean for individuals? But, those eggs that you're talking about, that added protein, that heavily laden protein breakfast is actually starting to be seen as a less supportive of aging or aging well approach to eating. That, we are better eating more whole grains as opposed to a heavy amount of protein. And actually, the eggs are much more pro-inflammatory than we have kind of been led to believe. And so, yeah, it might give you better satisfaction, but it may not necessarily be the best thing for longevity and aging well. The discussion for me when it comes to protein really comes down to, how much restriction is going to be necessary. I think the more sedentary you are, the more you need to restrict the protein, maintaining enough to maintain muscle mass. But the real way to maintain that muscle mass is to be active. So we need to increase the exercise and physical activity, particularly weight training. And when we are weight training, being able to balance that need for protein effectively is going to be important. Too much protein. And I think the more I've been thinking about it lately, is like, okay, it makes sense why more and more bodybuilders, large athletes die young, particularly with heart disease, is because of the negative effects of all the protein that is required to build all that muscle. And so I think that needs to be a topic we probably address in another podcast episode. But I think some of the views of protein are really shifting. And I'm actually kind of jokingly talking about writing a book someday, kind of stealing off the title of Robert Lufkin's book, The Lies I Taught in Medical School, and write a book called The Lies I Taught in Exercise Science, because I feel like we have really misled people when it comes to some of the things in exercise science that are not the best necessarily for longevity. They might have certain benefits for performance, but we have been way off the mark in so many different areas, and we're starting to correct a lot of those things. In regards to snack, I mean, I do think whole grain snacks, we're talking whole grain. We're not talking refined grains. We're not talking about the things that are going to spike our insulin levels. And when we are looking at things that may have a higher glycemic index, balancing those with foods that are going to lower that glycemic index can make a big, big difference. So if we're going to eat grains, including with that some amount of fiber, some amount of healthy fats, maybe the more omega-3 fats. For example, with the oatmeal, and I think oatmeal is a great snack too. If you're going to just midday, you need something to just kind of fill your stomach. Bowl of oatmeal with a little bit of, those omega-3 laden seeds in it is going to, the omega-3s, that little bit of fat is going to slow the ingestion and digestion process. But if you're looking at a more whole grain, groats are hard to find, but if you're looking at, steel cut oats, those have a lot of fiber in them that are going to really reduce that insulin spike. If you're eating white bread for a snack, making white bread on, toasting it and putting some peanut butter on it as a snack, maybe not be the best, but that peanut butter is going to do better for you than maybe adding, butter or other saturated fats to it.
I think you might be correct.
I'm always correct.
Well, no, you see, there's some weight to what you're saying about not eating protein first thing in the morning. Now, again, it works for me, and it may not work for everyone. But speaking of books, there was a book that was written early '90s, late '80s called Fruit Before Noon, and they go off of that same concept of restricting protein. And in the mornings, if you are going to eat, you're only to eat fruit. So blueberries, strawberries, pineapples, apples, just up until noon to 1, whatever the window is. And then after that, then you can eat your protein in. So, and a lot of people live strongly by that particular diet, and it works great for them. So, yeah, maybe we should do a podcast episode on that particular subject, that protein restriction window. I'd actually be really interested in that.
Well, we do have one scheduled, and we might actually do it in a couple different episodes because I have a couple different nutritionists kind of lined up wanting to be on the podcast. And I'd like to have that discussion about vegan, carnivore, Mediterranean, which is best for aging well, and what the evidence really is in regards to those particular types of diet. Because I think we get a lot of, I think even calling it misinformation is an understatement when it comes to social media, when it comes to what foods we should be eating and the spectrum of diets that we can be on. But yeah, I think, that it's going to be a good discussion to have. And so let's move on to kind of refined carbs, because we've almost been talking about that a little bit. What's it say about refined carbs?
Yeah, when it says about refined carbs, it says refined carbs, like white bread, white rice, most pastas, these lack fiber and nutrients, spike glucose, and contribute to insulin resistance, which is closely tied to accelerating aging.
Yeah, so we've been kind of touching on that already. I mean, the importance of fiber and getting the adequate nutrients in our foods. Oftentimes, those refined carbs will replace the nutrients that they've stripped out by adding it back in. Even if you look at like whole grain bread, it's oftentimes they've taken white flour and then they add back in the wheat germ and some of those types of things, which, okay, why did you take it out to put it back in? And so, yeah, they do have an effect of spiking our insulin. I think as a whole, we want to avoid white bread, period, other than maybe sourdough bread, which is shown to have some healthier benefits to it. Pastas can be okay, but there are alternatives to pastas that might be better for us. If you can go with a more whole grain pasta or go with some that are made with, and there's plenty out there that are made with different legumes. There's like chickpea pasta is pretty good. My daughter won't eat it, but it's actually tasting pretty good. You have whole wheat. There's buckwheat pastas that are out there. There are pastas that are made with more whole grains that can be as good. Sometimes we just have to kind of adjust our taste buds a little bit and realize that a Americanized Italian cuisine is not necessarily Mediterranean just because it's Italian food. I was reading recently that, today, most of what we consider to be Italian food is not at all in line with the Mediterranean diet. White rice, I think, is an interesting one because we do see a lot of cultures that have pretty good longevity and eat a lot of white rice, but still probably not the best. If you're going to eat white rice, one trick I've learned to kind of help reduce that insulin spike is to put a little bit of vinegar in it when you make it. That tends to alter the carbohydrate makeup a little bit, and don't fully understand how, but it alters the makeup a little bit to slow the digestive process and kind of reduce that insulin spike to it. But there are so many better other carbs that we can be eating to contribute to our health as opposed to reducing our longevity. So what does ChatGPT suggest we eat instead?
What it suggests we eat instead, it says choose intact whole grains like quinoa or steel-cut oats. That sounds familiar, Dr. Armstrong. Or swap in legumes and sweet potatoes. These nourish without causing metabolic chaos.
Yeah, I love my steel-cut oats. And I mean, regular grain oats, rolled oats can be okay as well. I think the big thing that you want to make sure there is that you're getting rolled oats that are probably more organically grown because they're not going to have the chemicals involved with them. But in reading some literature recently that, the overall effect of pesticides on our longevity is relatively small compared to all the other aspects of if you're eating meat, for example, the meat is getting that cumulative effect of all those pesticides. And the lower you kind of eat on the food chain, the healthier your diet overall is going to be. So getting those healthier steel cut oats, legumes, I think are something we should be eating every day. We need to have probably a good cup of legumes daily just to boost our fiber. It's increasingly shown to be probably one of the most longevity favorable foods that we could be consuming on a regular basis. So just eating your beans can be pretty good. And adding those to rice is going to give it a little bit more protein content and have a positive effect on the glycemic index of that rice. And so if you're eating even white rice with, say, some black beans mixed in it, then, it's going to be a little bit healthier for you. Sweet potatoes are incredible for longevity.
Yeah.
And in fact, I was just reading recently, I think was one of the kind of key components in the Okinawa diet, before we Americans kind of overtook Okinawa, and through the occupancy through World War II, I think we were occupying that until about 72. Really altered the diet there. There's now more KFCs there. And so people aren't eating as healthy, but that's considered one of the blue zones. And one of the keys to a more traditional diet there are sweet potatoes, particularly like the purple version of sweet potatoes. But sweet potatoes, if you want a potato food, a root food, it is an outstanding food to be able to eat.
Yeah, no, I agree. Sweet potatoes are awesome. Lower on the glycemic index, and they're way more flavorful. Like if I had the option between eating a regular potato and a sweet potato, I'm taking the sweet potato every day, which is interesting because I know yams are also a part of sweet potatoes, but I don't like yams. I feel like they're way too sweet. I feel like sweet potato is that perfect balance in between. Oh, it's so good.
I don't think there's any real difference between sweet potatoes and yams. I think it's
flavor
just
wise,
semantics.
yeah, there is. I feel like yams are way too sweet for me. I don't know.
I don't mind the sweetness of it. I mean, it's a natural sweetness. I have my friend John McGuire, who I think I've actually had him on this podcast at least once. He's been a guest on We Have a Spiritual Problem podcast. When we roomed together in New York, he had some health issues and was having really difficulty finding food that would settle, in his stomach. And one of the things that he found he could eat was sweet potatoes. And he would eat those like candy. And they were just so good to his taste buds. And he would literally like be eating raw sweet potatoes. I mean, I'd come home, he'd be eating them like an apple.
Oh,
yeah.
That's bold.
Huh?
I mean,
it's what?
I said that's bold. Eating it raw.
I'm pretty sure it was raw, but either way, I mean, it was just so good to his system. And so that to me is evidence of how healthy it was. And, back then, I was eating a much cheaper, budget friendly diet. I was eating a lot of whole grain, organic, short whole grain, organic rice, a lot of oats, a lot of legumes. I made a really good split pea soup. I made good lentil soup. Made a lot of sweet potatoes. I was eating healthy, relatively inexpensive foods, and those whole grains are not that expensive. And, people will complain that steel cut oats take too long to cook. One thing I've discovered is using a rice cooker. I just put them in there. I could put them in the night before, and you can even set a timer for it to start, and it cooks in about 25 minutes, not much slower than it takes to cook it on a pan or in a pan. And, I come down and my breakfast is ready.
Awesome.
All right. So let's move on to processed meats.
All right. Processed meats, bacon, sausage, hot dog, and deli meats. They're typically high in sodium and preservatives like nitrates, which have been linked to cardiovascular disease, cancer, and cognitive decline.
Yeah, processed meats are probably one of the most carcinogenic foods that we can consume, especially when you cook them. So you take a hot dog, which oven by itself is, what quality of meat are you really getting in a hot dog? But then you throw it on the grill and all those nitrates and, the proteins and everything just get so disrupted in the cooking process that you increase the carcinogenic effect of those deli meats. When I hear deli meats, I always think of the movie Heavyweights with Ben Stiller, when he kind of raids the cabin and goes in and he finds this big pepperoni in there, and he's, what's this, deli meat? And it's just, yeah, deli meats, there's so many better things that we can be eating than bacon, sausage, hot dogs, deli meats, and the list goes on in terms of processed meats. What are your thoughts? You're probably a big deli meater.
I mean, every now and then I'll get a hankering for good sandwich with some turkey, but I don't know. I'm actually not. I like my regular meat, my chicken breasts, my steak, my fish. But yeah, deli meat, not so much unless it's like once in a blue moon and you're like, oh man, I'm really hungry and I'm craving this deli meat. But other than that, no, not so much.
Yeah, I think it's something that we really should do on a very, very limited basis. I mean, if you're having deli meat more than probably once a month, it's probably not good for your longevity.
No, it's right up there
And
with cigarettes as far as carcinogen goes. I think on one of the scales it's like cigarettes, something else like car exhaust, and then like deli meats as far as carcinogen, which is insane to me. But
well, meats in general are going to put you up on that level. And again, we're gonna come back. We're gonna circle back around, and hopefully by the end of that particular episode, I'm going to have you eating far less meat in general and going to a more plant-based approach, fully vegan or anything like that, but a more flexitarian. And if you look at, again, the blue zones, at most they're consuming probably 10% of their food intake is from meat. Most are going to be anywhere from probably 90 to 98% to 100%. If you're looking at like Loma Linda, California, many of the Seventh-day Adventists in the community there are 100% vegan. But most all of those blue zones are probably eating at least 90% of their food is going to be plant-based protein, is what restricted protein, but plant-based, as opposed to eating meat. Now, they might only eat meat a couple times a month at best. So what does ChatGPT suggest we eat instead?
instead, go for lean, unprocessed protein, fish, poultry, eggs, legumes. If you eat red meat, keep it occasional and opt for grass fed when you can. I love grass fed.
Yeah,
It's so good.
I think if you're going to eat red meat, if you have to eat red meat, splurge and go for buffalo, because you're going to get the healthiest of red meats. It's probably, in my opinion, the healthiest meat product that you can eat is going to be buffalo, just for the way that it grazes, the amount of fat that you'll get in it. It's healthier than even poultry. And I've been kind of surprised. I'm currently reading Michael Greger's book, How Not to Age. And he talks in there quite a bit about, he pushes an entirely plant-based diet, but he actually talks about the inflammatory effects of eggs and poultry actually being even worse than red meat, which is quite interesting. And again, we'll dive into that a little bit deeper in a future episode. But what are your thoughts on going for lean unprocessed proteins?
I am kind of torn on this, and I'm afraid to give my opinion. But I used to be a huge advocate for lean proteins like chicken breasts and fish. Now, I do still think salmon is a phenomenal food that we should be including in parts of our diet. But as I've done more research, I do think that grass-fed red meats, or grass-fed beef, I should say, is super beneficial. I 1,000% agree with you as far as bison go. I think bison or buffalo is just amazing meat. Same with elk, and other types of venison. But I think that the literature that I've recently read kind of goes with your statement, what you said that they're poultry meat may not be as good, and there's a lot of reasoning as to why that is, but I think it's how it's sourced, honestly. And it's I don't know. I'm kind of torn on this because growing up, that's what you've learned. Like, go for lean proteins, and it's kind of a weird concept to say, well, maybe lean may not be the best option, and maybe some of the proteins with some of the fats could be good, or maybe we just need a different source of lean, and that's why I like I said, bison, elk, venison. I think those are awesome. I think there's a lot of benefits to those foods as far as the vitamins and minerals go that are in there, and I think it's yeah, that is my opinion. Um, that's my thoughts.
Yeah, I think if overall we reduce the quantity of meat products that we are eating on a regular basis, then your food budget permits buying more high quality meat like bison, and not spending an excessive amount on things like chicken. And I mean, chicken can be relatively cheap, but none of this stuff has been cheap lately. We look at the price of eggs now and things like that are getting quite expensive. And so it is becoming a much more of a luxury to eat those items. And so maybe that's a good thing that we're going to end up eating less of it. And when we do, get better quality. The eggs that we buy in our home, my wife has started buying them at Whole Foods, and I shouldn't bring this up because now people are going to start to go to Whole Foods for their eggs because they've actually been cheaper than our local grocery stores and the big chain grocery stores. And when you crack them open, the yolk in those are so bright orange that you're getting the healthiest of egg that you possibly can. And when we went to Ireland a couple summers ago, we were so impressed in the UK how beautiful the eggs were. And you come back here and you get these eggs that have probably been sitting in coolers for several weeks before they actually even get to the shelf in the grocery store, and you actually buy them and you get them home, and then they have just this kind of pale, blah looking yellow yolk to them. That in itself is not going to be quite as healthy. And so, if you're looking at, you're going to make the argument that there are healthy cholesterols in those eggs, then you want to make sure you're getting the healthiest of those cholesterols. Are those cholesterols beneficial? I'm not too sure. And as being somebody who's having to reduce my cholesterol so that I can shut my doctor up about statins, I'm going to reduce the amount of eggs that I'm eating. I'm going to reduce the amount of meats that I'm eating in general and really lean into legumes a lot more, because legumes, especially if you're eating a wide variety of beans, you're going to get a good balance of protein. You're going to get the amino acids that your body needs in order to support muscle growth and, as we age, to sustain our muscle and kind of fight off the sarcopenia that we see often with aging. Again, if you're going to eat meat, and that's not a fight that I would stake my life on. It's like if you want to eat meat, but eat the best quality meat that you can eat in order to sustain your health.
Yeah.
So any other thoughts?
No, I agree with that. If you're gonna eat meat, eat the best quality. But I think that doesn't
Yeah.
just go with meat. I think that just goes with everything. Just eat the best quality of whatever it is that you're consuming. I think that goes for fruits and vegetables as well. Eat the best quality. That's a good thing. All right, let's move on.
Yeah, but I mean, the problem with saying eat the best quality sometimes is you have a lot of people who accessibility isn't there, or income isn't sufficient to buy the best. And so you want to make the healthiest choices within the budgets that you can. And honestly, if you don't have a high budget for eating healthy foods, we tend to think that you got to spend a lot of money to eat healthy. And that's the biggest load of bullshit that we tell anybody when it comes to nutrition science that it costs a lot to eat healthy. Because as soon as any population gets enough money to be able to eat more expensive food, they start getting fat, they start getting more heart disease, they start getting more diabetes. You look at the poorest societies and communities around the globe, most of them are relatively healthy because they're making healthy choices. And one of the cheapest protein sources you can eat is going to be legumes. And, eat a lot of beans, eat a lot of rice, eat a lot of seasonal fruits and vegetables. You're going to be pretty healthy. We start going to restaurants, we start buying processed foods, we start buying expensive fatty meats. That's when we start getting sick. But of course, we can go to the doctor. So what difference does it make? We can afford medical insurance. So we don't have to eat as healthy to live longer. Then we can just, buy supplements. We can buy the blueprint and, spend $360 a month to live longer and eat whatever crap we want to eat. I'm being sarcastic here, of course, if our listeners and viewers can't pick up on that. All right. So let's move on to industrial seed oils. There's petroleum products that we're eating.
Yeah. Oh, before we dive in, I do think it's interesting that it's ChatGPT suggests seeds, but not seed oil. I think that's, I don't know.
No, there's a big difference between
no,
seeds
I
and
know
seed
there
oil.
is a big difference. I just laugh because I don't know. Anyways,
I'm not understanding the humor in that.
seeds, but we can eat seeds, but we can't eat seed oil, and seed oil comes from seeds. And yeah. Anyways, made me giggle.
Well, let's talk about why that is.
So industrial
What
seed
are the
oils.
benefits in seeds?
Industrial seed oils found in fast food, fried food, and most packaged products. These are high in omega-6 fatty acids, which are pro-inflammatory when consumed in excess and often oxidize from high heat processing.
So there's a difference in how we're utilizing the oils that we get in direct seed versus what we are getting in the processed oil. And so the oils that we are often using for cooking, we've addressed this in a recent episode, but those seed oils that are considered to be less healthy are the ones that are much higher in omega-6 fatty acids. They're chemically treated in their processing. It's probably less a concern of the oil itself as much as how we are using that oil. And we're using it to fry food. So all that fat is getting saturated into an otherwise healthy vegetable or potentially meat product. Most of like the fried foods that we're eating, there's other things that we're doing to it. We're adding a lot of bread, to the surface of it, so we have something to fry it in. But we're saturating that food with those oils, and the heating alters the oil. But when we're getting more omega-6s, the literature basically shows that omega-6s aren't that bad if they're balanced with omega-3s. So it's really a matter of what's the contribution of omega-3 versus omega-6 in your food intake. And when we're consuming an excess of omega-6s, that's when it becomes much more pro-inflammatory. We can counter that a little bit by eating foods that are going to be anti-inflammatory. But the goal is to really reduce the amount of pro-inflammatory foods that we are eating. Those seed oils are used because they have a higher smoke point that permits them to be heated at higher levels to be able to fry food in. And I think it really comes down to a lot more how are we using those in conjunction with the other foods. And so when you compound the omega-6s with the high amount of sugar that goes into a lot of those foods that we're frying, and the fact that the frying itself is going to be altering the structure of the food to make it more inflammatory, that's where the problem comes in. The oils in the seeds themselves, there's so many other things that are available in those seeds that we are eating. And oftentimes many of those, what is the seed that we're looking at as well? We mentioned healthy seeds. You look at your pumpkin seeds. I don't think I've ever seen in the store pumpkin seed oil. Might be available somewhere in there. Many Asian cuisines will use sesame seed oil, probably a little bit better. But again, how's it being processed to get the oil extracted from the seed? Olive oil is not a seed oil. So an avocado oil is very good, but it does have, lower smoking points, which make them less effective for frying. But again, why are we frying? Just get away from frying the food, use the oils in their more natural state, get the omega-3s from the food rather than from the oils. So I think, when we get into the fight over, frying in seed oils versus frying in beef tallow, the argument is moot if we just stop eating fried food. That makes sense?
Totally.
What are your thoughts?
No, just don't eat fried food.
There you
And
go.
also, yeah.
So what does ChatGPT suggest we eat instead?
Well, ironically, it suggests almost everything that you've mentioned. So instead, cook with extra virgin olive oil, avocado oil, or even butter or ghee in moderation. Prioritize omega-3 rich foods like salmon, flax, or walnut to balance your fats. So literally, you just took your suggestion and just capitalized on it.
Well, I want to point out one thing that it's doing that I think is a bit inappropriate. To say, you're going to balance your omega-6s by increasing your omega-3 rich foods. So overall, you're increasing your fat intake when the goal should be to be decreasing our fat intake. So really what we want to be doing is not cooking in oil. When we're using oils, emphasize extra virgin olive oil, avocado oil, and maybe to a lesser extent butter or ghee. But we want to prioritize foods that are going to be rich in that. So we're not using it to balance out our fats. We're using it to get the better quality of fats, which are going to be your omega-3s. And so my recommendation would be fry less, if not at all, and eat foods that have omega-rich levels of fatty acids as opposed to omega-6 fatty acids. And make those your primary sources of fat.
What if you're not frying? What if you're like searing? You know what I mean? Like you throw a little oil
Well, how
on.
is that any different, really?
See, that's a good point. All right.
Do we need to sear? And when we sear, that's where you start looking at, getting into proteins. You start increasing the glycation of the protein. And so, cooking at high heat, even without oil, is more detrimental to the meat. So a better approach sometimes to, if you are going to be cooking meat, is to broil it, cook it at a lower temperature, not grill it, because there's also so many carcinogenics that we pick up in grilling meat. I know this is really going to spoil your barbecue this weekend, but when we're looking at cooking, one of the things one way I like cooking chicken, and I want to really get back to it more, is cooking it in orange juice or fruit juice. Or, if you're cooking fish, sometimes cooking in tomato juice. It's an old Weight Watchers trick my dad had taught me to cut down on the fats in the diet. And it actually makes for better tasting food. So I had a dish when I was single living in New York. One of my favorite dishes that my roommate and friends would like me to make is I would cook, just get like pineapple orange juice, put it in the skillet, put the chicken breast in there and cook it that way. And then just add, crushed fruit to it to make kind of a nice little gravy, as my Long Island friend would call it. I wouldn't call a fruit juice kind of mixture as gravy, but that's what he called it, to kind of put over the rice that we were cooking as well. And it was a really, really tasty approach, but you're reducing much of the damage that you can be doing to that meat in the way you're cooking it. Rather than cooking it in oil, you're cooking it in a way that actually promotes its healthy benefits. Does that make sense?
Kinda. I mean, it makes sense as far as the acidity goes, but I feel like if you're cooking it in orange juice, you're just increasing the sugar content of it. But
Not really.
yeah, especially what orange juice is just
But
straight sugar. It's oh man.
No, it's not straight sugar. There are nutrient benefits to it, but also, again, we have to consider that not all sugar is bad for us. Our body needs glucose. It's how are we consuming it and what categories of foods are we eating that make it more damaging or less damaging. Carbohydrate is carbohydrate. And so it's not dramatically impacting the glycemic index because we're eating that protein with it. But in the long run, it's going to be healthier for the individual to eat that type chicken cooked that way than adding fat. How much glucose are you really picking up cooking in orange juice as opposed to cooking in fat? Fat has 9 kilocalories per gram. Carbohydrate has 4 kilocalories per gram. So you're looking at even a reduced caloric intake just cooking that way.
Yeah, but isn't most orange juices made from concentrate and have added high fructose corn syrup in it? And then
No.
I feel okay. All right. Well,
Why? No, then you just buy the better orange juice that is all natural, squeezed orange juice. I have never bought an orange juice that had added fructose to it. You're talking like Sunny D or some other crap like that. Yeah. But if you're buying quality orange juice and you're not using that much, I mean, you might put, a cup or two in the skillet in order to give you that fluid base to be able to cook in. It doesn't take much. It's just a small layer of juice at the bottom that just keeps it from sticking to the pan. So you're not adding a tremendous amount. And you're looking at spreading that cup of orange juice over, it could be, depending on how many people you're cooking for, it might be 6 chicken breasts. So I don't see a big negative issue with that. You're going to eat, ideally we're not drinking orange juice. We're eating oranges instead, but fruit is going to be healthier than oil, hands down. Do you not agree?
I bet it's very flavorful. I bet because
it is very good.
So I will say that. I bet it's very flavorful. It does sound good. All right. So what's the bottom line here?
Well, I'd say the bottom line is really it's less about demonizing individual foods. I mean, we have yet to really put together a list of 5 specific foods that one should not eat, or 5 foods that are making us age faster. We're talking about more categories of food, but it's less about demonizing the individual foods and more about consistently choosing patterns that support our cells' ability to repair, adapt, and to function well. So when we're looking at aging well, we're not looking about restricting, but more it's about alignment. Eat ways that support who you want to become and not just how you want to look or feel today. Because I think a lot of the issues that we're seeing in our society nutritionally is that we're taking the shortcuts to look good now, whether it's for our social media or whatever it might be. We're making the shortcuts. So, we're eating a keto diet to lose fat as quickly as possible. And we're not concerned with the long-term health impacts of doing so or what it might do to our longevity. And we want to eat a good balance. So if you're going to eat meat or we're going to eat things that are moderately pro-inflammatory, we have to understand we want to counter that with foods that are much more anti-inflammatory. And so if we tip the scale to being predominantly anti-inflammatory diet to pro-inflammatory, we're going to have an overall healthier lifestyle. And it's not about, well, this specific food is bad. And I get so annoyed when I look on social media and it's like, don't eat this food. This is the food that is aging you, or these foods are aging you. And they list like a handful of things. Those few things that you eat are not what's killing you. It's the culmination of all of the bad foods that we are overall eating. If you have an overall diet of fast food, high processed meats and dairy and very little fruits and vegetables, that's what's killing you. It's not the one fruit that you eat. I mean, heard so many times, apples are good for you, but the skin isn't because of all the pesticides that are on the skin because they spray them. There's actually benefit to eating the entire apple in terms of you can actually get more longevity benefits eating the entire apple. And they've done studies with this. I can't cite off the top of my head those particular studies, but they've looked at kind of the skin versus the internal aspects of the apple and the combination of the two, and mostly in animal models, but it shows greater longevity, the combination of those. And the pesticides that you might be getting on the outside, if you looked at how much it's impacting your longevity, it's a matter of hours as opposed to days, if that makes sense.
So, Dr. Armstrong, what foods would you suggest based on science that our listeners avoid eating?
Well, on the top of that list, I would put any pro-inflammatory foods. I would, and again, we're going to address this a little bit, in a later episode of this podcast, but excessive protein. So especially processed meats. If you are going to eat meats, eat them in limited quantity. Try to stick to maybe no more than a palm of protein. So about 4 ounces of protein in a meal, and the highest quality available to you in your budget. Trying, eat protein that has the least amount of saturated fats to it, but trying not to eat as much protein, because we do know that reduced protein is going to have a positive longevity effect. Avoid excessive fat in general. Again, we can argue back and forth over saturated versus polyunsaturated, monounsaturated. In general, if we reduce our fat overall, we're going to be healthier and live longer. We didn't talk a lot about dairy, but I would avoid excessive dairy. And if you're going to be eating dairy products, I would focus more on yogurt as opposed to milk products, just because the probiotics and such in the yogurt are going to have a better benefit to your gut health and going to give you, better overall longevity benefits. But avoid overall dairy. And then I would avoid alcohol as well. Really keep that to a minimum. So if we're looking to things to include more, my recommendation would be eat more legumes. If you're not eating legumes, start eating some. If you're eating some, eat more. If you're eating more, eat more. And try and make that a greater component on your plate, at least one meal a day. If you can get at least 1 cup of legumes a day, it's probably going to benefit your longevity. If you can up that to 2 or 3, you're going to be even better off. Don't worry about the flatulence effect that comes with increasing your bean intake. Initially you might fart a little bit more, but just be aware that will subside over time as your body adjusts to eating more beans.
Gas will pass.
But that's one of the healthiest things we could do. Yeah. The increased gas will pass. Drink more water. And I don't think fuss over the water content that significantly. I'm not a big fan of drinking bottled water, just simply because the plastics and the processing and just the ridiculous amount that we pay for water that is generally not much more than filtered tap water. But if you are concerned, or if you're in an area where you have poorer quality of water, use filtered water. Most refrigerators now will deliver filtered water to you. And drink more coffee and tea, particularly black tea or herbal teas. Green teas are great. But these are all have a plethora of benefits that tend to go overlooked when it looks at, beverages that we could be drinking. So if you need something with a little bit more flavor, having that morning coffee or tea, up to 3 cups of coffee a day have been shown to be very beneficial. Drink that in the morning, switching off to more herbal teas as the day progresses. Try and keep that caffeine to the earlier half of the day as opposed to later in the day so we get better sleep. Focus on plant-based omega-3 fatty acids as opposed to too much, meat-based. So salmon can be good, but an excessive amount of salmon, there's issues that come with too much of that. And I think the literature shows fairly well that plant-based omega-3 fatty acids have better longevity benefits than those that are coming from animals. Big one I would recommend is more whole fruits, especially berries, eating a lot more berries. And probably my last recommendation is one that I would attribute to my old friend Joe DeLuca, a buddy of mine from Long Island, that we always kind of charged him with bringing the salads when we had kind of community meals, because his philosophy was the brighter the salad, the more colors that you included, the healthier it was. And so we want to include as much different color in our foods, and particularly try and get more deep blues and purples in our food, because those have much more of the anti-inflammatory benefits. But the more color we're getting in our fruits and vegetables, the more likely we are to get the breadth of nutrients that our body needs, the types of phytochemicals and stuff like that in the food that are going to promote longevity.
So I guess in conclusion, Avoid sugary beverages that increase blood sugar levels. Make sure that you're drinking your water, your coffee, and minimize the sweeteners that you're putting into it. Avoid all processed foods. There's no need to discuss that. Switch it up with healthier carbohydrates like sweet potatoes, nuts, seeds, Greek yogurt, even. Avoid any refined carbs like white bread, pastas, completely stay away from those. Avoid processed meats as they are carcinogenic and you might as well smoke a cigarette. And we do not allow smoking, especially if you're a listener of this podcast. Avoid as much industrial seed oil as you can. Switch it up with healthier options like extra virgin olive oil. And if you do all of these things, especially listen to Dr. Armstrong's advice on the Aging Well podcast, hopefully you'll switch up your diet, have better eating habits, and age well.
Thank you for listening. I hope you benefited from today's podcast. And until next time, keep aging well.